Joe, we've made it! We are at the last episode of the series.
I know, another series down, and somehow we have reached our 40th episode, which is kind of mind-boggling.
I'm really proud
in
of
a
us.
way. It's taken a while, but we've got here. Actually, no, it hasn't even taken that long. It's been like a year and a half.
Yeah.
So the next milestone, I guess, is the 50th. So we're gonna have to do something a bit special at the end of the next series, I suppose.
I still think we need to be starting on some merch. I think we should be doing t-shirts.
Okay, here's
or
the thing.
hats.
If we get 2 messages requesting merch, then we will do that.
We'll do merch, yeah.
We're setting the bar
Please.
nice and low.
Please message us because I really want some merch.
And your message doesn't count as one of them.
Can I get my mum to message us in?
Yeah, that'll do.
I mean, we've tabbed it up and we've released around 20 hours of church comms over the last year. You know, I think that's a year and a half, actually, as you said, not a year. This is pretty good. We won't ask the percentage of sort of how much of those hours were genuinely helpful or, just us sort of rambling on. Though I do wonder how much of the time that you had to cut out of me saying, just going down some random rabbit warren of train of thought and stuff. So,
or just us kind of losing it and laughing and losing the will to live slightly.
Yeah. Can't get even a basic sentence in now. Can't get a basic sentence.
Okay, so we'll cut that bit out. Yeah. In any case, we hope that you've enjoyed this series as much as the other ones. We've had a real mix of topics, although that's not really anything new. We're a bit all over the place with the variety of topics. And obviously, we've had some great guests that we really appreciated them joining us and sharing their perspectives. I thought it was worth giving just a really quick reminder of what we do, because whilst we both, I think it's fairly obvious, we love making this podcast, we also have bills to pay. So my main focus is on running Be Gallant. I provide web design as well as logos and branding for churches, and then working with other Christian charities and small businesses as well. So if your website needs a makeover or a bit of a refresh, then you can get in touch through my website at begallant.uk. How about you, Hannah?
Kind of do the same thing in working mostly with sort of churches and Christian charities and small businesses, but I do social media and content. So helping with just understanding how to use social media, using it for good, creating content and getting their voice online. I offer training, webinars, talks, one-off consultancies, but also longer-term supports and sort of account management. If you want to find any more about me and what I do, you can find it at fhdigital.co.uk.
Yeah, so do get in touch with us if either of those things are things that could help you. We have also set up a Buy Me a Coffee link. So, obviously, aside from our time, there are other costs involved with running the podcast. So if you wanted to send us a little something to say that you've appreciated our content and contribute towards that, then you can find the link in the episode description. But it's not something we're going to bang on about. And, obviously don't feel bad if it's not the right time for you to do that.
Yeah. So with that, let's get right into the series finale, episode 40 of Gourds and Pomegranates.
Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
So stories have power. There's something about human nature that we love stories. Maybe a lot of that is due to the Bible itself. It seems that our Creator God also enjoys telling stories. Not to mention that Jesus used them extensively as a creative way of communicating messages to people during his time on earth. And we're not saying this and talking about stories just to add another thing on that ever-growing to-do list as we think about the things that we need to do as comms people. We're not talking about this just for the sake of it. But by understanding and working on storytelling, we can aim for the way that we preach the gospel to be somewhat as engaging as the message of the gospel itself.
Yeah, and this goes sort of not just for online content, but we'd like to apply it more widely, thinking about other activities done within the church, even sermons. We're aiming to creatively capture attention of our audiences, whether they are online or in the pews, and making the message itself more impactful. We need to think about the content we make online. It could be social media, websites, written sort of visual graphic content, or video even. By actually creating a narrative and give people value, actually give them something that they can take away. You know, our content shouldn't just be about promoting events and come and join us on a Sunday. Come and join us on a Sunday. If we sort of take out the religious root of what we're saying, and you know, take out the church aspect of it, if we just look back through human existence, stories have always been a part of our culture. It's how we identify how humanity has grown, how we sort of have focused on technological advances and stuff. You know, whether it's sitting around a campfire or drawings on walls in caves, you know, plays, music, art, literature, print, even. You know, it's how we pass down important messages, history, and how we've learned. We just can't help as human beings but tell stories.
Yeah, it's a very human thing.
Yeah, exactly. And very often it's so easy to get caught up into the kind of doctrinal aspect of our faith, you know, the rules and what we should and shouldn't do. And we can end up sort of, we're at risk of living quite kind of monotone lives, which is kind of actually really sad. I think one of the things we often forget within our lives as Christians is that stories and storytellings and even sort of creativity is a big part of our faith. The Bible, literally a book of stories, it's full of individuals and groups and cultural stories that we should be trying to kind of emulate and echo within our own lives. Our call as Christians is to preach the gospel and grow the kingdom. We just simply won't achieve this by sort of monotonously repeating, whether it's someone in the street or on social media, you know, come on Sunday, see you on Sunday, join us on Sunday. We hope to see you on Sunday. It's just not what Jesus did.
It's not what people do either. It's not a normal way of communicating with people. And yet you do hear messages which are presented very much like that. And you see videos on social which are very much like that.
Yeah, exactly. But say sort of, it's not what Jesus did. He went to where the people were at. He spoke about the things that they knew. You know, whether that's sort of fishing or shepherding or hospitality, he spoke the language of the day. It's why a lot of the time, sometimes it's difficult for modern understandings of certain ones about seeds or farming aspects. We just don't understand that because farming, for the majority of us, is not part of our culture. But it was probably what the majority of those people listening could understand.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus could have just simply uttered commands and rightly expected people to follow them. And we should have done if he had. But instead, he carefully crafted stories that really spoke to people's hearts. Stories such as a father and his son and the heartbreak that ensued, or about a stranger from an enemy nation was the only one to react in love to a situation that needed it. Getting across the point of how God would want us to act rather than just stating it and having it maybe fall on deaf ears. The whole Bible is a narrative like this of people, of their lives, their journeys, their highs and their lows, and the creator who in himself is all about creativity.
Yeah.
And so if we're the body of Christ, we're unique, we're given free will, we don't just follow black and white lives, but we engage with all the different aspects of life. And we can do this with creativity and imagination. You know, we have to tell and listen to stories to connect with people. We should be doing that. If we're reflections of God, you know, we should reflect the creativity he has. So what do today's stories look like if people might struggle to connect with the stories of Jesus' time? How do we tell the stories that are going to resonate with people today?
Yeah. Obviously, we're not talking about kind of becoming flippant or irreverent about what we're sort of talking about from the Bible or teachings. But it's sort of, what can we do to sort of retranslate the message to a context that listeners will be able to connect with? I don't know, some people think we shouldn't, but I don't think that it's wrong to change aspects or make it relevant to the listener, because that's what Jesus did. And then there's some things to sort of really think about, and you can easily pull them out from the stories that are not just from Jesus, but the whole Bible. But I think they're really important kind of elements to think about what we need to be thinking about when we're kind of working out what stories to share. The first one is sort of connection and community. You know, can the listener connect with the story? Is there something that they're able to see in themselves or see themselves in? Is it something that they've experienced? Is it something that they're going through, or that they know people who've experienced that? Does it help to build community? You know, does it bring people together, whether it's shock or awe and excitement? One thing that's actually quite topical for the nation at the minute is the post office example, something that's been going on for years and years and years, but has sort of generally been dismissed. It has caused some awful trauma for a lot of people. Yet, you know, ITV have created this drama, and within a couple of weeks, it has completely changed the nation's attention to actually going, no, this was a problem that we need to resolve. And it's fascinating to kind of look at it from a cultural perspective of how something fictional, in essence, has changed politics, has enacted societal change, hopefully should bring some sort of compensation, though I imagine sort of in the grand scheme of things, that's not so much. But the fact that a story is going to change people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's taken that story and that dramatic retelling of it to actually bring about change and to change perception, because the facts haven't changed and it's all been publicized. But yeah, it has actually changed society. Now, I think one thing with this that strikes me is that if we're going to tell stories that connect with people where they're at, we need to know where they're at. We need to actually listen to them. And so even down to a simple sermon illustration, it's hard for a pastor to come up with something that actually relates to people's everyday lives if they don't really know what everyday people's lives are like.
Yeah, true.
You know, being absolutely blunt and not to exclude anyone, but if someone comes straight out of school to be a pastor, they are going to really, really struggle to talk about and communicate the working lives of people. And obviously we can't experience everything. No. But in order to relate, at the very least, we need to be listening.
Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, missional listeners are something that I'm incorporating a lot more and talking about through my work, because you know, if you're writing a strategy, well, for your comms, that's all very well and that's cool. But actually, yeah, do you know what the people in your community, within your church family, people in the street, do you know what their worries are, what their excitements are, what their goals are,
what their world is like?
Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, as you say, and if you're thinking about either if you have a family and you're talking about Hannah or Sarah not being able to have children, and you know, that's a huge issue for a lot of women and families. But actually, do you know it if you're not experiencing it, or if you've not experienced it? That's not to say that you can't talk about it, but it's about understanding actually what people are going through. And that kind of leads on to then authenticity and authority. Again, are you being as real and as authentic as you can be? As you say, you know, you can't talk about working lives if you've never lived it. And that's not to say you shouldn't talk about it, but it's not pretending.
It's not so much that you can't talk about it, but it's very hard to talk about it because it's not your story.
Yeah. But what you could do is share someone else's story of saying, I was speaking to my friend who's going through this, or I know a couple who are desperately trying to have a child and we've been talking through this. And, you know, actually you can bring in the stories of other people and okay, that's not yours, but you are being authentic and going, I don't have a story to share within this, but I will bring another story.
There is a story, even if it's not mine.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it requires sensitivity doing that,
absolutely.
Obviously. You know, that actually in a small church, if you say a couple, like it's probably not that hard to work out who the couple is.
Yeah.
And if you've got the permission to share the story, that's one thing. But, you know, even then broadcasting that out to everyone is another step.
Maybe it's not something that everyone knows.
Yeah. And it's not just about having like a permission slip to say you can do this, but just being sensitive and thoughtful with those things.
Yeah.
But if someone is actually telling the story themselves, you know, if you say, look, if that's a really key theme in what I'm preaching on today, then instead of it just having to be the same 20-minute lecture style sermon, then let's break it down. Like let's look at the Bible and let's say, look, I want to invite these people up to just share a bit of their story now, coming as it were straight from the horse's mouth. Like that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And then you can, let them sit back down and continue with it. And not only then are you using storytelling in a creative capacity, but you're being creative with your format as well. And that will also help keep people engaged.
Yeah. And, I think that's why sort of testimonies are so powerful, because it's not just, I'm reading this thing from this person, but, if you're hearing someone talk about their experiences and their journey, knowing that that's the thing that person went through. I mean, that's why, really difficult ones are so moving, because it's just like, wow, that's such an incredible thing to hear. And as well, if we think about what then goes online, even though there's so much kind of fakeness and filters and adjustments that we can do online, that actually authenticity is such a valued thing. We know when it's all fake. People, especially younger audiences, they know when you're lying or sort of actually that you're being a bit disingenuous, and there's sort of 100%. Red flags there and stuff. So actually,
and then it's worse than not telling a story at all, because if you're telling a story which is seemingly sort of manufactured in order to generate an emotion, then that's just seen as manipulative.
Yeah, exactly. And also then within that kind of authority of actually, it's not about saying I have the right to tell this, but actually of not being shy in saying it, of actually kind of owning that you have a right to share this. Not a right, but in terms of like the gospel is for everyone. I'm going to share this. So, if we're telling a testimony, or if, you're wanting to create content online and someone's like, no, but I don't really have anything to share, or, oh, my story's not that exciting. Actually, no, we should own what we have to share, own our stories, and actually say, this is the thing that I need to share or that I have to share. Because again, just leaving it to one person or sort of being quite sheepish in it, again, gives a kind of like, you don't either really want to share it or...
So you're saying sort of sharing with confidence.
Yeah.
And that even just being confident about it and owning it almost sort of gives you the permission for people to actually have to listen and engage with it.
Yeah.
And I guess, part of this as well then is recognizing the stories that we do have, even our own stories, whatever that looks like, whether that's sort of taking some time to just reflect on situations in your life that actually would apply to other people, or whether it's keeping a note of things that happen when they do, so that you remember them better and can refer back to them. Yeah. It's important to recognize that we all have stories, because if we don't actually think about it, then we're always going to struggle to tell them.
And that then takes us on to kind of personality and personability. And these kind of, again, they all sort of link into each other. But if we think about personability, that again is what you're saying. So if it's authentic, but actually, is it something that I can relate to?
So you can tell an authentic story, which actually isn't personal or relatable at all. So I heard it was an old story the other day about a celebrity who will remain nameless, who was sharing on Twitter and saying, how do you get the convertible roof of my Bentley to close? Anyone else got any input on this? Like, no Mickey takers. And the comments were all obviously, oh, so sad for you. The chain came off my bike the other day and all this sort of thing. Like, that person was being authentic and arguably they were being vulnerable by putting it out there. But it wasn't relatable to the vast majority of the audience that they were talking to. And so it obviously didn't land in the way they wanted it to.
No. And again, it's, that's such a good story. And it's sort of, for me, I observe it very much of like generational issues at the minute, said within churches, of talking about something, or actually it's not even within sermons, but sort of this kind of discussion within churches. So like where I live at the minute, it is unfortunately quite a kind of expensive area. And it's making as a young person trying to, if I even find somewhere to rent, but to try and get on the sort of housing ladder is just a nightmare. And I was talking to someone at church and said something, and I'm sure they meant it in a nice way, but it was sort of like, oh, you've just got to save, or, oh, something will happen. And I was like, well, kind of not, because like, everything's really expensive and I'm self-employed. That means, and it's, you just don't get what I'm going through right now. Like, we do not have that connection, but actually you can't relate to what I'm what my crisis in life is. And so if people are talking then within a sermon about something, and I'm going, well, actually, that's not even an issue for me because I'm so far behind in that.
I suppose the balance is that, some stories are going to appeal to some people and not to others. And so we probably need to think carefully about the context which we use the stories in. That maybe that's something that would work well if we're sharing a home group discussion or in a smaller meeting that's a bit more intimate where people know each other, or the sort of meeting where people are sharing different stories and it's more acceptable to have something which is kind of your own experience but not universal. We're not always going to be able to tell a story which relates to everyone and lands the same with everyone. And actually, if we try to do that and only do that, we're going to miss the mark.
Messy.
But just being careful about if there are things which potentially are going to alienate people, there are definitely topics which I think you can have a biblical opinion on, and you can have people who have the opposite biblical opinion on, and there are things we can disagree on. And so it's not saying don't talk about those things from the front, but you be very careful when you do, because as much as stories have the ability to connect, they also have the ability to alienate.
Yeah, exactly. And it sounds this sounds kind of, I don't say flippant, but it does sound like it's a sort of slightly irrelevant thing with it. But especially if you're creating video content or if you're having someone doing some written content, personality. And there are sometimes, you can have a discussion with someone like the preacher, and they are the most insightful, wise, knowledgeable person. And it is incredible to talk with them and have a conversation and discuss with them. However, when they do a preach, it is really difficult to say kind of stimulated and interested as they're talking, because perhaps they are just talking in a way that is not most engaging. And I know it's tricky to kind of mark people down on that stuff. But if you're creating either written content or you're doing videos to go on social media or something, have the people that actually are engaging. So do they write in a very engaging, interesting way? Are they someone who actually likes being in front of a camera, or that, doesn't kind of end up just going really like this and not really looking at the camera, and it's all really awkward and stuff? I mean, there's reasons why, talk show hosts and stuff like that. Someone like Graham Norton, he's so fun to both watch on TV and to interview. People are so comfortable around him because he has a wonderfully engaging, friendly personality that people warm to. And so you want to watch him because he's fun and interesting. Whereas, some people are not so fun to watch on TV.
I mean, look, there are going to be some people better suited to some things than others. What we're not saying is that preachers should be entertainers.
No, absolutely not.
That's not the point of this. And if it comes to having the most, I'll say it, boring, unengaging presentation style with gospel truth versus having someone who's an amazing communicator but preaches a load of absolute rubbish which doesn't line up with the Bible, then 100% I'll have the most boring preacher all day long. But at the same time, maybe it's something where you take on feedback from other people. Maybe you just need to be honest and take feedback from yourself, record yourself, listen back to it, watch back to it, because communication is a skill in the same way that preparing a sermon is a skill. And it is something that you should consider putting time and effort into how you communicate, in the same way that you consider what you're going to communicate. Now, that's not to say that it should be like equal levels of time. It's really important that you get that message right. But if you can help that message to land through the way that you're communicating, then absolutely do that. I was part of I can't remember what it was called now, but a preaching course by Andy Kind last year. Now, Andy is a preacher, but he's also a comedian. And he talks about how the way that preaching is taught hasn't really changed for 100 years, but our society has. And so just doing something like that, where you can just think creatively about the way that you put your messages out there. I mean, I'm not a preacher. I'm a communicator, but I'm not a preacher. But I found it super helpful for just, thinking about the way that I'm actually communicating the things that I'm trying to communicate.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of actually takes us on to vulnerability, which we don't need to go into too much of, because I think it kind of does again link into all of the other sections. But again, if you're telling a testimony where you've had maybe some difficult life choices to make and that you have really found yourself not in a good place, and then God came in and, saved me, and wow, that's amazing. But the fact that actually you've shared that you've been in a really difficult place where, to be honest, I don't know, most of the time, church does not entirely feel, it feels more like a club for a bunch of happy, fixed, perfect people, rather than I heard it of like, it should be a hospital for the broken, not a catwalk for the perfect or something like that. But there is this sort of tension between being vulnerable as Christians of going, I've had problems in the past. I've got problems at the minute. My life is not perfect. It's only Jesus that is perfect. And he's working through me, but actually I've still got problems, and that's okay. And we've all got it. And I'm not better than you just because I go to church.
Yeah, and that connects with people as well, because it links into, like we're saying, the openness and honesty. Again, as long that's not saying that we should like manufacture vulnerable situations or music or feelings just for the sake of it, but actually just being honest and out there.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, teaching and learning, because I think, again, it's not that stories are just there for entertainment's sake, but actually what can we take to learn from them? And that's what Jesus was doing, of telling a story to say there is a lesson behind this, and probably why.
It's asking why are we telling the story, isn't it?
Exactly. And so, okay, you've got the thing that you want to share with someone. Okay, how can we make it a little bit more engaging and exciting? But also, actually, I've got a story. Is there something that we can learn from this? So it's thinking of it kind of from both sides. And this is not really for necessarily church comms people. Well, no, I think it is, because I think we should be doing fun things like this. Like, how do you learn Bible verses? Because, we should be learning more Bible verses so that we can, they can just roll off the tongue when we need them. So, we should be learning them so that they're constantly to hand. And when I was younger, growing up, so I'm sort of just pre VeggieTales generation. We had the Donut Man, so which a lot of UK people don't know. He's an American youth worker or something. It's quite funny because loads of people look at me really blankly when I kind of explain it. I won't do it here, but do go and look him up, because there's some fun songs. Most of the series and stuff, they would do these kind of Bible verses and songs because there was a story behind it, and there was a lesson for the kids to learn. And I'm talking 25 years ago or something, but I can still remember some verses because I have got those tunes in my head. I can remember 2 Corinthians 5:17. If any man be in Christ, he be a new creation. The old has passed away, the new has come. Purely because there was a very catchy song.
Yeah.
Which I will make Joe include in the show notes. But it's
I'm scouring YouTube right now to find a backing track and get you to sing it to us. But the thing which is actually stopping you from doing that is knowing that you would absolutely love the opportunity.
Yes.
But you're right though. Like it helps you to remember. And I would be willing to bet that for any listener now, if you think back, whether it's learning Bible verses or story, whatever it is, it will be because someone told it to you in the story. That's what sticks with people. So it's not only that it resonates in the here and now as we're listening to it and we go, oh yeah, that actually might apply to me, or seeing it in a different way. It will help people to remember it for years and years as well. I can remember illustrations from a single like youth training day thing that I went on when I was about 12. I can't remember anything else from the day, but I can remember the illustration. And that was the point of the illustration, is it's what people will remember. So choosing carefully when we use the stories, which stories we tell, presenting them in the right way, but also thinking, what are we actually trying to teach with this story? Because there's no point someone remembering a story just for the sake of it. We want them to remember the reason that we're telling the story. So if that's why we tell stories and a few practical ideas of the guidelines for how we tell stories and how we don't tell stories, what does it look like to use this in practice for our church comms?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of touched on a few bits throughout the first half. So we'll just kind of list it as best as I can, keep it succinct. But if we think immediately about church, and so we'll go for a sermon first. We've already talked about including personal stories, whether that's your own or whether you can get people up to come and talk and share their stories. Can you include kind of historical anecdotes? So actually not just reading the Bible or not just sort of sharing, oh, this is the Bible story, but actually what did it mean for, why was it that the Samaritan, using the Samaritan, was such a kind of critical person to use for Jesus? Because actually, if you don't understand the cultural, historical, and political dynamics between the different communities and the different people that Jesus pulled out, specifically, he didn't just go, oh, a guy walked past. It's a Samaritan walked past. Why was that so important and so shocking for the people? And as well of thinking about actually, so you said, Joe, earlier about how we preach hasn't changed. Probably 100 odd so years ago, that actually it was very much, I'm going to teach at you and you're just going to listen to me. Whereas now it's a lot more in a dialogue sense. And so people want to be engaged with. So could you ask questions of going, have you ever had it where you kind of have walked past someone? Or have you ever had it where someone you least expected helped you? And actually get people to put their hands up or get people to kind of like comment back, because actually that's a sort of, you're stimulating them into a dialogue and for them to feel like they were involved in it, because they go, oh, I remember actually on Sunday I answered a question and that was fun.
But doing that, like finding a modern day equivalent story of a parable doesn't excuse doing the legwork in terms of sermon prep, because you, in order to find that modern day equivalent, you need to know the reason why Jesus was telling that story. You need to know really what he was getting at and the ins and outs of that as well. Yeah.
But it's sort of not just keeping it sort of simple because that's easier, but actually what can we do to just make it more interesting and engaging? Yeah.
So another way that you might include stories is through your church newsletters, through your website and blogs. These are all things that we've spoken about separately, so this shouldn't be brand new information. But you will have stories of community outreach that the church has been doing. You'll have stories of volunteer work, and those are things where you can film it while it's happening. So if, for example, you're doing a community litter pick to bless your community around you, you can film that going on. You can get, going back to the B-roll conversation with video, you can get some nice close-up shots of the rubbish being picked up. You can get wide shots seeing people involved. But then you can also get the stories direct from the people who are doing it and, maybe with the people who are being blessed by it as well.
Yeah.
But as well as those sort of stories that are happening, you can look at the stories which have happened in the past for people, but haven't necessarily been told. So personal faith journeys and testimonies, things that you can feature them in church newsletters, whether that's in the long form, whether that's as a little teaser that links to a blog post and tells those stories there. Because I think that we're also in danger of, like, whenever we say story or talk about story, assuming that has to be either from the front or on a video or something. Like, it definitely doesn't need to look like that. Stories told in text are clearly something which still resonates people because people still buy and read books.
Yeah. And then that even goes, I mean, you can use that stuff then within your social media, but actually this is where social media is so underutilized by churches, because all they do is just post, oh, here's the live stream from Sunday. But actually you could share short stories of, again, those things that have happened that either go on throughout the week, that are good news, that are positive impact, that are things that have happened in the past, but also the behind the scenes. So actually, could you have some pictures of what sermon prep looks like, loads of books out, or, actually what worship practice looks like for the team, in preparation for Sunday. Or actually just heartwarming stuff, like those good news, feel nice things is stuff that people want to see on social media. I mean, so I've got a client and we do one thing for the community on it, but I put up a picture recently. I should be able to put up 2 pictures recently of the building. They didn't really have anything to do with necessarily one post was a story. I was specifically highlighting a news story, and the other was just like, oh, look at the sunrise here. they've had like fantastic engagement levels because it was something that people were like, oh, that's so beautiful. I know that view. I know that walk. It has nothing really to do with what we're doing, but actually it was a lovely way for people to sort of just feel like, oh, they're not trying to sell me something. They're just trying to kind of like, I could resonate with that because that is in my community.
Yeah.
That is something
just showing that you're there.
Yeah, that I can sort of feel a personal connection with because I know that view. Maybe I don't see that sunrise necessarily, but I know that view.
Yeah, and it'll always be the case that those incidental things that don't and shouldn't make up like a core pillar of your content strategy, but from time to time showing like, don't make me tell the boiler story again, but it will be the things which you don't expect to have loads of engagement. It will be the things which are a bit of a last minute, not that thought through, don't take that long to produce, and yet suddenly they'll take off because those are the things people don't see. And that will just show a different side of your church to people, whether that's people who are in the community or whether that's people who are already in the church.
Yeah. I mean, again, something like the boiler story, it's authentic of just going, like, this is who we are, and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think as well, like, obviously trends will change for what people are connecting with, but at the minute it's very visual stuff. So again, make things engaging for people to visually see, whether that's, changing up photography or using things like infographics or, just do some fun little funky infographic or assets and stuff for Bible verses or things. Canva's got so many resources that you can use to create. It's not that difficult to create stuff that will just sort of capture people's attention rather than it just being written on Facebook's text section. And things like video, and even though it's not visual, but podcasts and stuff, just making things accessible. Don't just go like, oh, here's a Sunday sermon and that's it. And, or here's the live stream. But actually, can you create those specific videos of whether that's personal testimonies or, I mean, we've listed them already, just things that are happening, or just kind of get to know the church family. It just helps to build a broader view, but actually you get to know the people, because very often I don't know the guy that's leading worship if I'm watching on a live stream because they never introduce him, but actually getting an opportunity to watch a 5-minute clip of him just talking about his journey, what he loves about the community and stuff. Just then when he's worshiping, I go, oh, I kind of like feel like I know him a bit better and I can connect with that.
It's a different connection.
Yeah.
And all of this goes all the way back to episode 33 where we were talking about content repurposing. Like, these are things which, just because you create a video of someone's story doesn't mean that is the only time you can ever post it on that platform in that format. You can take quotes from it, you can put it into a blog post, you can do all these things. Yeah. So loads of different ways of doing that. And the different sort of main things. Are there any other sort of random tidbits that we can apply in terms of storytelling to comms?
So a few things again, you've got the different levels of content. So as you said, like, so you could intentionally do like, say, a longer recording of someone's testimony, and that's cool. And you've got some really then good higher quality videos. But actually, how can you engage people throughout the church and use more people, but with something that's not as time consuming with doing it? So could you have kind of little quick questions at the end of church of just going, I just want instant response on something, what was your one takeaway from the service? Or what did you love today about church? There's old school Vox Pop kind of style videos. And it doesn't matter if they're a bit shaky or they're done on your phone or there's a bit of background noise, because again, authenticity and vulnerability of just showing this is who we are. And we're not trying to pretend to be super fancy, because we're not a super fancy church and sort of. But actually, think about the different levels or the different kind of the scale of what you want to create, something bigger and longer or something sort of shorter, snappier that you can use a bit quicker.
Yeah, the format needs to match the message, really.
Oh, yeah.
And so if someone's telling a really deep, meaningful story, then it's not going to be great to just do it quickly, because they're not going to be able to properly tell it, and it's just going to not hit home with people. I think a potential idea for testimonies is to have a few people around the table telling testimonies to each other as well, especially for people who struggle to be in front of the camera. It's not then just them on their own. They're not looking at a lens and talking to the camera, but they're talking to other people. And it might be that the other people haven't actually heard those stories before either. And so it connects with them. And there's some things like, I love those actor roundtables on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Because it's not just them going, yeah, so I remember this time when I was doing this film, and you go, great, good for you, well done. I'm sure, your coffee tastes amazing, Mr. Clooney. But it's then you're seeing other people going, yes, and why was that? Or yes, I feel the same as well.
Yeah.
And like in seeing those reactions, it provokes different reactions in you and just awakens different things. So that's something which I think is worth exploring, is that like sort of group video of a testimony. And that doesn't mean that you have to put it out as an hour-long roundtable. It could be that it edits down into 5 or 6 different videos, like one for each person. Yeah. It could be that you take little individual stories from that and put those out as standalone things and then link to the full video. There's loads of different ways of doing it. And I think one other one is when we say interview, I think so often we will think of a filmed interview, like 3 cameras. But having interviews at the front of the church as well as part of your service, it's something which varies it up, but also it's telling stories, but in a structured format where you're not saying to someone, right, over to you, here's 10 minutes to fill, but you're saying like something which has been really successful, I've seen in several different churches, is this time tomorrow. Yeah. So what are you going to be doing at 11 o'clock on a Monday morning in your job? Like, tell us about that. And it might be that some people, that's a very black and white functional description of what they're doing, but it will probably lead on to stories about how their faith has impacted their work, how they've related to other people at work, the struggles, and how God has come through for them in those situations.
Yeah. But actually, if you tell someone, oh, you've got 10 minutes, you go, oh my gosh, what am I going to talk about? But if you have structured questions and they know them beforehand kind of thing, that actually I've had it before if we've said, look, these are the 3 questions we want to ask you. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. I know what I'm going to do. But I think actually it's a good point you say about kind of like the Actors Roundtable, because I mean, why do we like, those long running TV shows, Friends, Game of Thrones, and I don't know, I try to think of other old long ones that, I don't know, Cheers and stuff like that. So it's because I've really dated myself, haven't I? It's because they allow you to really get to know the characters. It's not just a film where you have a brief snapshot, but you have hours on hours really to sort of journey with them and allow you to relate to these people. So yeah, I really like the idea of sort of, you've got maybe one longer video, but actually could you break it down? And actually, can you create content that journeys over time with the church? So it could be something kind of as simple as look at our building works that are going on, or even look at the garden as we go into summer and actually look, I don't know whether that's in pictures or video or something, or get to know our church staff, of whether you start with one question and then you expand and you add more. But actually, it's just a way of growing and getting to know the church family that actually sometimes it might be really difficult for people to be able to experience that and do that within the hour and a half that you have on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, I think that consistency is good. I mean, we've mentioned before that, with the case study that we were looking at, and off the back of that, they've done introductions to the volunteers in their church. And that's been really cool to see that and to see the different faces popping up. But then an extension is, after that introduction, a few months later, we do a video with that person. Or even just down to when I see group photos, when I see the stories you're telling in the community, the same people are popping up. And like, these aren't just random people in a huge faceless church, but these are people that I can get to know and that I have something in common with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess that's why it's also important to tell a variety of stories. Like, it's very easy to just use the people who are comfortable talking about themselves, comfortable being on camera, and tell their stories again and again. And actually, like, people have so many stories and such rich lives, we can probably fill out a whole year of content with just one person. Yeah. But why would we do that? It will be incredibly repetitive, but it will also just make everyone who isn't going to relate to that person go, well, this church isn't for me. You know, you've got lots of different people, lots of different backgrounds and cultures. Tell all of those stories and vary it up. Yeah.
So just sort of on my final kind of few points, it's interesting you say about, in a way, language, if it's the same person. Because actually, if we go back to thinking about Jesus, he spoke the language the audiences could understand. So not just having one person speak their language, but actually of also thinking not just the church speaking its own language. So just make sure that when you're not using too much Christianese if you're trying to talk about testimony or something of where you actually that's trying to really connect with those who aren't yet part of a church, but actually can you make it in a way that someone who is at the beginning part of their story and help them to understand. And actually that then goes on to how can we as churches and church leaders equip our church families to improve their own storytelling, not just how do I tell my testimony when it's filmed or at the front of the church, but actually so that they're better at sharing the gospel and their story in their context. So if that is someone in the workplace, if that is someone who is very involved in sort of community action work, but you're talking, with people who are experiencing homelessness or food poverty and stuff, we don't want to be talking about the riches of God because they're like, love, I ain't got any riches, in my first place. I don't want to be hearing about my rooms in heaven. I haven't got a room here. So actually, how can we better equip people to translate the things that we're learning in church on a Sunday and throughout our own spiritual lives so that we can share it better throughout the rest of our weeks?
Yeah, and so I guess just to sum up, when we're thinking of comms, posts which have stories in them are going to get more engagement. That's because they speak to people, it's because they elicit responses. And so as they're engaging the heart and the mind, that's probably going to get social media engagement as well. But that doesn't mean that that's the reason that we do it. Like just because the algorithm says so, we shouldn't be a slave to that. We definitely shouldn't be a slave to getting more likes and comments and shares. But instead we should be influenced by the Bible and therefore seeking to communicate in the ways that God communicates with us. What's nice is that sometimes these things intersect. And so if we can actually say maybe the reason that people engage with these things is because that's how God communicates with us and has created us, then great. We should absolutely be considering how we can use these methods to uncover and communicate the stories that we have already got hidden away in our congregations to reach people for Christ.
Yeah.
And obviously, we are not the first ones to come up with this, which probably goes for almost everything that we've ever said on a Gourds and Pomegranates podcast. But we want to bring it to you because we think it's really helpful. We think it's a way of improving your church as well as your church comms. And so, we want to recognize the others that have gone before. And we've linked in the show notes to some of the resources which can be helpful when thinking about storytelling, particularly thinking about storytelling as a communicator.
Yeah.
So that's it for this series.
Yay!
We have loved having you with us, and we will be back before too long with series 5 of Gourds and Pomegranates.
Gourds and Pomegranates is brought to you by Joe Gallant and Hannah Fleming Hill. You can find episode transcripts and contact the show via gppodcast.uk.